I'm Miles.
I'm Gwenda.
Wait, your name is Gwanda?
Yes.
In today's video, I'm gonna be talking about Spider-Gwen and her journey. It took me a little while to gather all the information and do the research on her character in the Spider-Verse movies, but I've managed to pull everything together, so let's get started. Gwen was the only daughter of George Stacy and his wife, Helen Stacy, who sadly passed away when Gwen was very young. This had a big impact on her childhood. It's a shame we don't really get to know much about her mom in the movies. She's not mentioned at all, which is kind of disappointing. The only thing we know about her mom is a birthday letter that Gwen keeps in her drum set, and that's about it. Her mom's death really affected her. She didn't know her mother well since she was so young when she passed, and with her father being a police officer, he was often too busy to spend time with her. This left Gwen feeling isolated, without any friends. The only friend she had was Peter. Her dad was good friends with the Parkers, who were their neighbors, so that's where Gwen met Peter, and they became close friends. At one point, Gwen's dad enrolled her at Vision Academy, and Peter went there with her. It's also where she met Mary Jane, Betty Brant, and Glory Grant, and they all became friends. Gwen even joined their punk rock band, the Mary Janes, as the drummer. Besides being in the band, Gwen had other interests too. She was into ballet and also joined the school gymnastics team. Her dad supported all of these activities, but for Peter, things weren't as easy. His nerdy looks and interests made him an easy target for bullying at the academy, especially from Ned. Gwen always stood up for him when he was being picked on, but unfortunately, it didn't really help. Instead of stopping the bullying, it only made things worse because it made Peter seem weak in front of everyone. Gwen was bitten by the radioactive spider when she was around 12 or 13, and that moment changed her life forever. The bite gave her superhuman powers and amazing abilities. Her dad, a cop who always stood up for the law, was her biggest inspiration. She wanted to follow in his footsteps by helping people and fighting crime with her new powers, so she became a vigilante known as Spider-Woman. However, this is where the conflict begins. Her father didn't like this new vigilante. In his eyes, fighting crime and helping people was a job for cops, not for random people who took the law into their own hands. He didn't trust her actions because he thought she believed she was above the law. Even though Gwen once saved his life from a deadly gunshot, it didn't change his opinion of her. When Gwen talks to her dad while in her Spider-Woman suit, she always deepens her voice to try and keep her identity a secret. Despite her father's disapproval, Peter became really interested in Spider-Woman. He would often talk about her to Gwen and even show pictures of her. Her dad would frequently interrupt these conversations about Spider-Woman, not wanting to hear anything related to her. During the homecoming dance, things took a turn for the worse. Gwen had planned to go to the dance with Peter as friends. There's some people that think that Gwen had feelings for him, but that wasn't true at all. It was purely platonic. There was never any hint of her having romantic feelings for him. In fact, this version of Peter was never meant to be her love interest, just her best friend. So, as I was saying, during the dance, Peter wasn't there. That's when Gwen's spider sense kicked in, and a giant lizard crashed the party and started attacking the guests. At first, the lizard seemed to be focused on Ned for some reason. Gwen quickly put on her spider suit and fought the lizard, eventually defeating him. But when the lizard lost his transformation, Gwen was shocked to discover that the person behind the lizard was none other than her best friend, Peter Parker. He had transformed into the lizard because he wanted to be special, just like Spider-Woman. What made it worse was that Peter had known all along that Spider-Woman was Gwen, but he didn't tell her. In the middle of this, Gwen was holding Peter's lifeless body when her father showed up and saw what was happening. When he saw Spider-Woman next to the body of his daughter's best friend, he immediately thought Spider-Woman was responsible for his death. Imagine losing your best friend, having your own father hunting you down, and dealing with all this pain at once. Needless to say, this loss completely changed her. She became completely isolated, with no friends at all. She couldn't talk to her father or open up to him about who she really was. She kept herself distant from everyone to avoid any distractions and promised herself she would never make a friend again. She started taking her responsibilities as Spider-Woman much more seriously. Even though she knew it wasn't her fault, she still felt guilty for Peter's death. To make things worse, her father constantly hunted her down because of it. 2 years after becoming Spider-Woman, she was suddenly pulled into a portal and ended up in a completely different universe. This is when her life truly changed. She arrived a week before the portal opened in that world, and her spider sense told her to go to Vision Academy. As we know, she followed it, and that's when she met someone who would change her life forever, Miles. This was the moment she met him. He made a joke, which wasn't very funny, as he was late to class, and no one laughed except Gwen. She even tried to start a conversation with him, which was unusual for her, especially considering how isolated she had been. Miles is kind of responsible for giving Gwen her new haircut. He had just gotten his spider powers and tried to flirt with her by using the shoulder touch technique. But his hand got stuck in her hair, and he couldn't pull it out. Gwen ended up having to cut part of her hair to free him, and that's when she got the new style.
Nice to meet you.
Sure. Total pleasure.
Some people say Miles ruined her hair, but honestly, it suits her perfectly and fits her personality. As the movie went on, Gwen started feeling something for Miles, something she thought she'd never feel again, a connection, a friendship. She saw how open and caring Miles was, even willing to be her friend and offering her a spot if she ever decided to make friends again. That feeling of friendship slowly started to turn into something more, but Gwen didn't quite realize it. She started caring for Miles a lot, and it was really tough for her when she had to leave his universe. In the goodbye scene, Miles could have easily made things romantic, and she probably would have been open to it, but instead, he offered her friendship, which made her smile. She accepted, and he became the only connection she made after losing Peter. The moment when she said goodbye was really touching. You could see the spark in her eyes, and the way she said,
See you around, Spider-Man.
After that, she went back to her own universe, to the place where she felt isolated, with her father still hunting her down. Being in Miles' universe, especially with him, made Gwen feel different, like she could be herself. But returning to her universe and leaving everything she had with Miles behind was really hard for her. Back in her own universe, Gwen couldn't stop thinking about Miles, and on top of that, she still felt the guilt of losing Peter. Her father's relentless pursuit of Spider-Woman made everything even harder for her. She even pulled away from her band, the Mary Janes. She often channeled her feelings into her drumming, using it as an outlet for her stress. There was so much weighing on her, and Miles was always on her mind. She really wanted to see him again, but being in a different dimension made that impossible. What's interesting is that her drum set holds 3 important things to her: a happy birthday letter from her mom, a Polaroid picture of her and Miles, and her Spider-Woman suit. Every time her father talked about Spider-Woman and about bringing justice for Peter's death, Gwen would often try to avoid the conversation. Eventually, he found out who Spider-Woman really was: Gwen, his own daughter. She revealed her identity to him, hoping he would understand and support her, but instead, it went the opposite way. His duty as a cop took over, and he pointed a gun at her.
Anything you say can and will
Dad,
be
are
used
you
against
really
you in a
this
court
afraid of
law.
me?
You have the right to an
Dad,
attorney.
stop!
I can't even imagine how hard it must have been for Gwen to see her own father do that. That was definitely devastating for her. She was eventually recruited by Miguel O'Hara, another Spider-Man from a different universe, along with Jessica Drew, a Spider-Woman from yet another universe. This was her escape from her own world, a way to get away from all her problems. Running away from problems isn't always the best solution, but for Gwen, at that moment, it was the only choice. She thought maybe she could see Miles again because she realized that these 2 spider people could travel between dimensions. She hoped that by joining them, she'd get a chance to reconnect with him. Miles was the only real connection she had left. She lost her mom, her best friend Peter, and now her father didn't trust her, so things felt even harder. Just the thought of seeing Miles again gave her some comfort, but as we know, things didn't go as she hoped. We don't exactly know what Gwen did when she joined the Spider Society, since there's no flashback or any details about it yet. Maybe in Beyond the Spider-Verse, we'll get to see what happened in the early days of her time there, but for now, we don't have that context. While in the Spider Society, Gwen made a lot of new friends, like Spider-Punk, Spider-Man India, and others, but none of them felt the same as Miles. With him, she could truly be herself. The Spider Society, especially Miguel, started pushing the idea of canon events, certain events that must happen for every spider person, and if you disrupt them, there can be major consequences. Miguel made everyone believe in this, including Gwen and Peter B. They learned that Miles wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man, that he was an anomaly, and that his canon event was the death of his father. After hearing this, Gwen was probably heartbroken. Miguel had planted the idea in everyone's mind that messing with the canon could destroy an entire universe. Gwen believed that if she told Miles about the fate of his father, he would try to prevent it, and that could destroy his universe. Miles was the only person who meant everything to her, so she and Peter B made the decision not to see him. Peter B followed through, but Gwen couldn't resist it. She disobeyed orders and ditched her mission to monitor the spot just to spend some time with him. She couldn't resist in being in his universe and not seeing him. When Gwen was with Miles, she felt like herself again. They had their spider date together, and I have to say, their chemistry was amazing. Gwen knew she was falling for him, even though she didn't plan it, it just happened. She even mentioned how in every other universe, versions of her had fallen for Spider-Man, but it never ended well. When Miles said maybe things could be different this time, that there's a first time for everything, she leaned on his shoulder, and it was a beautiful moment. But things went wrong when she messed up monitoring the spot because she decided to see Miles and she ended up losing him. Eventually, she had to leave his universe, probably forever. The way she looked at his universe before stepping into the portal said a lot. She knew she might never see him again. What she didn't know was that Miles was there, invisible, right in front of her, upside down. He followed her through the portal, causing a lot of chaos and heartbreak for both of them, but especially for him. I'm not gonna lie, what Gwen did to Miles wasn't right. I get that she had her reasons, and I understand her side, but it was still heartbreaking. She lied to him and wasn't honest because she was afraid of losing him. But in the end, that made everything worse because she ended up losing him anyway. Miles felt betrayed when he realized that Gwen and Peter B knew his father was going to die and never told him.
You talked about this? You knew? You all knew? That's why you never came to see me.
For Gwen, it was incredibly hard to face what she had done. She felt embarrassed by her actions and how she treated the person who meant so much to her. Instead of being honest from the start, she let fear guide her and lied, thinking she was protecting him. But it only made things worse in the end, because Miles felt betrayed by her silence. After Gwen questioned Miguel about the canon events, she was kicked out of the Spider Society and forced to return to her universe to face all the problems she had been running from. The best part of this was that it gave her the chance to make things right with her father. He began to accept her for who she truly was, Spider-Woman, and realized that his life without his daughter didn't make sense. The moment when they hugged was really beautiful. He even quit being captain for her, which was a key turning point for Gwen. She started to understand that Miles was right. In most Spider-Man story, a captain is always meant to die, but by quitting his role, her father avoided that fate, and her world didn't get destroyed. This made her believe that Miles' idea about breaking the canon is possible. Honestly, I never doubted that Gwen didn't believe in Miles, she always did. But she had been holding on to the fear of losing him if he tried to save his father. Seeing her father alive and avoiding his death made her realize that she had to make things right with him, even though she knows that's not going to be easy. One of the most beautiful things about Gwen is her character arc.
One thing I learned from Miles: it's all possible.
She started out isolated, but by the end, she became confident and gave a big middle finger to the canon events and the Spider Society. All of this change is thanks to Miles. He's the one who inspired her the most. He made her realize that she doesn't have to let fate or fear control her life. She's determined to write her own story and be with the person she wants to be with. By the end of Across the Spider-Verse, she has gathered a whole group of spider people to rescue Miles in another universe, and her determination is clear. She's going to war for him. She knows she hurt him, but the first step in fixing a mistake is recognizing it and trying to make it right. That's exactly what she's doing. We don't know how Miles will react, but one thing's for sure: Gwen will do whatever it takes to regain his trust. She's a completely different character now. No more holding back her feelings or staying away from the person she loves because of the canon. She's going to write her own story, and I'm really curious to see how her redemption arc will be. I'm sure it's going to be incredibly emotional.